Well, hey there, y'all. It's Michael Osinski.
And it's Tyler Esselman.
And you are listening to This One Goes to 11.
This One Goes to 11 is our podcast where we invite someone every week to make their case for what they believe is a perfect album.
So perfect. The 10 out of 10 just isn't good enough.
It really isn't. I hate to say it.
Mm-hmm. Tyler, did you see the meme that is going around regarding two very monumental album releases that happened just a few days ago?
I don't know that I have.
So, I mean, maybe you heard on this past Friday, that a huge album was released by a major artist. And of course, I am talking about Pearl Jam releasing Dark Matter on Friday. There was also another album that was released on Friday at the same time by, what's the name?
Swift.
Taylor Swift. Yeah. I've heard of it. But there was a meme going around that it was like Barbenheimer, essentially. Like the fact that both were coming out at the same time. I don't know. But have you had a chance to listen to either one yet?
I've listened to the whole Pearl Jam album, and I've started to listen to Taylor's new album. I've only made it about a quarter of the way through. It's dense. It's very dense. And I feel like, there's lore. And I don't know all the lore.
Right.
And so I'm trying to just let that go. But yeah, early returns, the Pearl Jam album, I freaking love it. It's really, really good.
I mean, I told you before we recorded, like I've already got one of my best albums of the year chosen. But I mean, come on, it's Pearl Jam and it's me, so we get it.
The thing that I like about both of these albums is that they both seem very familiar to me, based on how I think of these artists. Right, like these songs that I've listened to from the Taylor album so far sound kind of like early Taylor to me.
Okay.
Which is cool. I also found out that Glenn Koch from Wilco played on a few of the songs, which, listen, I love that guy and I approve of her taste. So however that connection was made, I definitely approve of it. We are talking to one of the Mike crowd. We are talking to Derick Loafmann. Who's Derick Loafmann, Michael?
Well, I know Derick Loafmann. Derick Loafmann's name gets auto-corrected by his own computer. He is currently a middle school reading and writing and social studies teacher in Chicago, but he's also an actor-writer on indefinite semi-self-imposed hiatus. He graduated from college with me, Mike, roomed with him, me, Mike, during London semester, and was a part of Flashpoint Theater Company in Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. These days, Derick spends his time adventuring with his family, being nerdy about baseball, and driving around in a minivan trying to outrun that puffy suburban dad vest.
His Osinski bingo card is so full. Isn't it? He's got Flashpoint, he's got Drew, he's got London semester, he's got semi-retired, that tag of the kind of theater artist he is that so many of your Drew compatriots I feel like would probably commiserate with. He's awesome. Yeah. And we recruited him to talk about a specific album, as you'll hear. In fact, we should just get right to it, shouldn't we, Tyler? Oh yeah, let's go.
All right. Well, without further ado, Derick Loafmann, welcome to This One Goes to 11. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me. Nice to be here.
You're part of the Mike crowd. You are a Mike one, and that's a big deal around here. I'm not sure if you heard.
Having listened to a bunch of the episodes and re-listened to several episodes recently, it's a lot of fun to hear where, like mutual friends of Mike and I, what they bring in, and then Tyler, what your friends bring in, see where the overlap is and where they diverge. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, there's a very specific slice of the Venn diagram for Michael and I. Like it's and every now and then we just hit it right on the nose. It's just and it feels so good when we're right in the pocket. But you also were his roommate during the infamous London semester. That
is absolutely true. Yes.
I keep hearing about this. I've been hearing about this for years.
Which is arguably, and maybe we'll get to this when we get to standards for perfection, is arguably the very real origin of this podcast, frankly. Like, if we think about it going all the way back to the year 2000 when we were in London, that may be the actual origin of this podcast. But
yeah, there are a lot of Mike memories from that semester. I also think it's kind of fitting that you and I, instead of taking a cab to Heathrow like everybody else, decided to lug 4 months worth of suitcase to on the Piccadilly line all the way out there, changing trains. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You don't need no cab.
I don't know.
Who needs a cab?
Yeah. I don't regret it at all. Like,
I don't either. That's the thing.
I have vivid memories of, I think both of us like running downstairs with like wheelie suitcases, like bang, 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 banging on steps as we went.
And I'm fairly certain by the end of that trip, only one of the wheels on our suitcases combined worked.
Oh yeah.
That's all you really need is you just need one in really good balance. That's
angle it just right. You'll be all right.
Exactly. Okay, well, it sounds like you've listened to the podcast before, Derick, which is great, and we're very excited about that. So let's transition to the you part of this. We asked you to bring us a perfect album.
Well, to be fair, we told him he was covering this album.
Okay,
this is one of those episodes,
right? So, tell our listeners, what album hath thou brought before the tribunal today?
The album I am bringing before the tribunal is Paul Simon's Graceland. Which should actually be Paul Simon and a whole lot of other people's Graceland. Yeah. So let's give credit where credit's due right off the bat.
We must, because I think that's part of the that's part of the greater context of this thing, right?
If you don't deal with it, it can't go to 11.
Yes,
like, you can't just ignore it.
Aha. Yes. Okay. Then you're already addressing something Tyler and I were discussing before this episode, which we will dig into as we go.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, before we can evaluate your case, you get to evaluate our case, or in this case, Tyler's case, because Tyler is going to take the reins of a little segment we like to call, Tyler,
The Beginner's Guide to Paul Simon's Graceland in 60 seconds.
So whatever scale you want to use, Derick, whatever rubric, go full Montessori on this, go, whatever, however the spirit moves you in the moment.
All right. Sounds good.
I will say I've been bricking really bad on these recently. And so I'm hoping I tried to dial this one in, but considering he's one of the best selling recording artists of all time, this is a feat on that level. So
I mean, I enjoyed your overtime win.
Thank you.
On one of the more recent episodes. Yeah.
I was appreciative for
good
that.
framing too. So I'm in on that.
Thank you. And everybody loves extra innings, right? It's free baseball.
Free baseball, baby.
Oh my God, that's right. You two need to talk about baseball. I forgot about that. You both are baseball people.
Happily. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
We're going to do that.
60 seconds and 3, 2, 1. Go.
There are a lot of very important Pauls in the history of Western culture. McCartney, Newman, Thomas Anderson, Walker, but few of those Pauls rival the metaphorical stature and influence of one Mr. Paul Simon. Born in Newark, raised in Queens, Simon's father was a band leader and double bass player and early proponent of young Paul's songwriting itch. A fateful meeting with Art Garfunkel when both were 11 years old spawned a collaboration that while consistently turbulent, did produce some era-defining music for the 60s and 70s. You know the ones. Mrs. Robinson, The Sound of Silence, Cecilia, the list goes on. But all the while, Simon kept up his own solo output apace, voraciously absorbing the sounds of the places and communities he steeped himself in. One such encounter with the Umbekanga street music of Johannesburg, South Africa, led to what is widely considered Simon's most consequential work, 1986's Graceland. Controversially recorded during apartheid, Graceland incorporates Umbekanga and Isikatamia sounds with Zydeco and his own brand of folk pop, to produce an album that, however you might feel about it, put South African music on the world stage like never before.
Wow. I feel like that is worth. I'm going to go with 19 Simons and 1 Garfunkel.
That's just how Paul would like it, I'm sure.
I was gonna say, is that the right proportion? I think it might be.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. It was you had to touch on art. Like, we were going to talk about art at some point, but he's still getting short shrift all these years later, right?
All the time.
God, what is up with that?
In their relationship, one of my favorite little side digs comes from the concert in Central Park, the first one I think that they did, where Art Garfunkel points out that when he sings his song that he wrote, he's like, this is the only song tonight that was not written by Paul Simon. Like, ooh.
So petty.
Ooh,
so petty. Paul is petty on a level that is like simultaneously seems effortless, but also just feels like a submarine, right? Like he's got this.
How do you not see it coming? Like,
yeah, he's prowling. He's prowling for any opportunity to do it. But I'm so interested to hear about how you have lived with this artist, because it sounds like you have a deep connection to it. So let's start with talking about you. Derick, tell us a little bit about what your relationship is like with music, writ large.
Music to me is tone. It's one of the three ways that I kind of process things. The other two being comedy and baseball. Those are my super nerdy pursuits, and I use them constantly.
Sweet.
But to me, music is tone. It has all of those ideas and text and all of that, but I use it as the way something is said. So you can have, I might get an idea about community or a relationship or how things are supposed to work together. I might get that from comedy, or I might get that from learn my lesson from comedy or learn my lesson from baseball. Mm-hmm. But it's music that tells me how to take it, kind of. It's so when people say they don't really listen to music, it doesn't make sense. I know rationally that has to be true.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure people can do that. But to me, it seems like, so you just live in a world where everything is monotone and you have to judge purely on text. You have no idea if somebody if they're being sincere, if they're making a joke. I don't understand that at all.
Yeah. So it's hard to compute for me too.
Music. And it means when I come across big things, whether they're positive or negative, I usually have to put on something. I have to listen to something. I have to drive around and listen to something, or I have to sit in a room and listen to something.
Yeah.
I'm a very terrible guitar strummer, and I have to sit in the basement and I have to plunk something out, whether it's just messing around on a string, or whether it's chords or something that I've that's three chords that I've learned. But yeah,
that's all you need.
Music
actually,
is a big one. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's great.
Green Day made a whole career out of just three chords. So you're fine.
Well, listen, I'm a Dylan fan, so that's
same deal there.
Not a whole lot more chords going on there.
Yeah, I love this thing about its tone, because it does. I think that's a good way of putting it. It's always been for people who say that they don't really listen to music intentionally. Those strange animals that we encounter in our lives. Considering none of us three are probably that way, is it does feel like, well, there's music around you all the time. You're driving in the car, you're listening to the radio, you must do, but the way in which you let it in maybe is the difference. The way in which you let it access your inner life is potentially the difference. And it sounds like you have a very intentional way of doing that.
That's a really interesting way. I hadn't thought about the vulnerability you allow yourself when listening to music is, I think, something that can make a real difference in how you receive. The people talk about songs and albums that mean a lot to them, and they're so varied that then the key must be something in the listener, right? Mm-hmm. If you can have that range of things be that effective to this many people, we must be the difference. yeah, we must be the difference in how we allow ourselves to access it. That's a really good point you made there. I like that.
Well, I'll give you 1,000,000 points for music as tone and just 3,000,000 points for mentioning baseball. How's that?
Listen, I could do a baseball podcast.
Don't tempt me with a good time, Derick. Okay, stop it. I have enough on my plate. Okay.
I hadn't thought of like listening to music as being a vulnerable experience until you said that, or like one that exposes your vulnerability. But I mean, I think about that in two different ways. One, now when I'm listening to music, for the most part, it's via earbuds. Mm-hmm. And so like when I, as you know, Derick, I listen to music quite loud. Yeah. So like when I have them in, there's like if I were to sit in a room and have my eyes closed and just listen to music, someone could sneak up on me or steal something from me, because I guess I'm vulnerable in that respect. But I guess maybe the way that we're talking about it more is the sense that you could be like in a car with someone and a song pops on and you're not all seeing the same thing. You're hearing the same piece of music, but you're not inside each other's heads. Like, what if you hear a song and suddenly you just start crying for no reason to everybody else because they don't know what your history is with that song? And then if you try to explain what your connection is to that song, it feels like it still doesn't even quite capture it.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, that's one of the things that I think is so much fun about talking about music that means something to you. I don't have the music education to talk about, you know, the artistic qualities or I could talk about Prince or Bowie or Aretha or Marvin Gaye on one level, but it's the level that I take it, and it's the level of how it fits into the social setting, the personal and the social setting. But I don't have the music theory. I don't have that kind of tool to talk about that. So when we're listening to music, when we're talking about music, I really enjoy people telling their experiences with it and what they like about something.
Yeah.
Rather than like, I can't access the other one.
Well, you came to the right podcast because we don't know shit about theory. Because
I know a few things.
Okay, he does.
But
he does.
Yes, you do. Yeah.
But we've had people who have even like initially like turned down being on the podcast. I'm like, well, I don't know a lot of stuff, and I'm like, well, great. It's great that you don't know a lot of stuff about music theory, or you don't know everything about the history of the artist, because a good friend of the pod has essentially told us that what we really have here is a storytelling podcast, not a music podcast. So.
Yeah,
I'm cool with that.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll give 40,000 points to that friend of the pod who said this is a storytelling podcast. How's that? You mentioned Dylan.
I'm rooting for them to win.
Helping you out. You mentioned Dylan. You mentioned Prince. You mentioned Bowie. You mentioned those artists. So it sounds like those are in your personal pantheon. Tell us a little bit more about who those artists were for you as a young person. Like what was little Derick listening to?
Little Derick was listening to this. Was listening to Graceland. This was the first CD that my family ever owned.
Nice.
And
your family, the whole family, the first one.
Wow. Yeah, my parents grew up. Didn't grow up, but like they were in college in the early to mid '60s. Mm-hmm. And so folk music was big, and each of them sort of had a different spin on what they liked in folk music. My mom likes things that are classically good voices and sheen and all of that. Mm-hmm. So like she loves like the Kingston Trio. And that's her thing. And my dad, I remember being like 15 and could have been a Sam Goody.
Nice.
Wow, Sam Goody.
Ooh, there it is. 100,000 points for Sam Goody.
It was one of them that had listening stations. And I can't remember what I was there to buy, but he drove me to Woodfield Mall and went in, and I was looking around and I saw him at a listening station. And in my mind, like when I was a kid and he came to pick me up, he always had the classical music station on. So that's what I thought he liked. And I thought that was all he liked. And I walked up after he left. Like I kind of watched him and he walked away, and I went up and I picked up the same headphones, and he was listening to Bob Dylan's MTV Unplugged.
Ooh,
and
nice.
That was, so it turns out that another friend of mine who I've known since I was 3, for my birthday that year, his mom had given me the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan album CD.
Yeah,
Cats meowing here, but and so I it was still in the wrapper. It had been sitting there for I don't know, a couple weeks, still in the cellophane. And I went home and I opened it up, and Mike could probably tell you about how much I listened to Bob Dylan in college. He probably heard it on rotation with most of Motown. That was
yes.
like, yeah, that's my, I love soul music and I love folk music. And that's really the thing. Bowie is something I came to much, much later, and I'm still learning about Bowie. Yeah. I brought up Bowie because one of the things that Bowie does is he's very deliberate in what he is trying to create. Yeah. And so I can't access all of the things that Bowie can. I don't know everything he's doing. I get some of it. I really appreciate it, but I'm still learning a lot about what he's doing or what he was doing at different times. And I think it's really cool, but I'm definitely a student of it. And then as far as I brought up Marvin Gaye too. I had a conversation years ago with actually another mutual friend from Drew, Chris Johnson, where we talked about art, the art being multifaceted. Sometimes it's deliberate, sometimes it's accidental. And the fact that it can be both of those things is really cool.
Oh, I like that.
But it's rare when an artist sets out to do something very specific, very important, and nails it and just completely meets the goal. And What's Going On does that. And we decided we were going to call it Art Squared. And that was kind of that was a ride. If you've ever tried to drive back into the city from O'Hare Airport, you're going to be sitting there a while. So you have time to come up with all sorts of things, but that was, that's where
Art Squared. So Art Squared is that if you're both trying to make something world changing and you accomplish it, that is Art Squared. Is that the hypothesis?
That's it. That's because so often people try to do something and they do something very deliberately, but it doesn't go the way that they intended for it to go. And sometimes they do something very deliberately and they miss, but it's even better. And those aren't Art Squared moments. They're not better or worse. They just don't fit that category.
This is probably why What's Going On is what's going on
is that's the quintessential artwork, I think.
We haven't talked about that one yet. I'm looking forward to that.
I noticed.
There's a growing list of albums that we're just waiting for someone to bring forward. But
it's really fun to listen back. It's been really fun to listen back and hear you get to just the edge of talking about something that hasn't been talked about, but that's not what we're dealing with. That's
right. Yeah. We only have limited time here.
That's right.
I give you 600,000 points for the really amazing thing that successful art, quote unquote successful, can either be deliberate or accidental. It can be successful in that way, and then also in Art Squared as a concept, 600,000 for that.
So, okay, do you remember the first time you heard Paul Simon's Graceland, or how you discovered it specifically, other than the fact that it was your family's first CD? I'm assuming you'd heard it before then.
Yeah. I'd heard, but it seemed to be somewhat, ever present at the time, but I remember You Can Call Me Al, on the radio. And I remember I did not have MTV, but I do remember the video. And because I did not know what anybody looked like for a very long time, I believe that Paul Simon was actually Chevy Chase because of that video.
It's a great video.
Yeah. It was on at my house a lot.
Yeah.
And so, and you go to like, you'd go to some party that your parents were going to, and it was in the background, and it was, just all over the place. And then, they were on TV, Paul Simon and most of the time, Ladysmith Black Mambazo were also there. And that was this whole overwhelming visual that went with this rich, like just engulfing sound. It's been my favorite album for as long as I can remember.
Engulfing's a cool word to use for it too. If we can get into that even just for a moment, it's like does it sound like it's recorded in a big ass room? It sounds like they're not filling the space, but it just sounds huge.
Yeah.
And I've been as I've prepared for this, I'm trying to figure out how. I'm trying to figure out how Paul Simon, this guy, and you credit it probably to all of these artists that he brought in and showcased, but like how do you feel like he created this huge sound? Or how did it seem as a young person when you were first experiencing it?
I didn't know any different as a young person. Like this was sort of it. So you just it just filled. Oh, actually, so my parents are both ordained ministers, and so I grew up going. My mom didn't work as a minister when I was growing up. She was a management consultant, and my dad worked at a church in Chicago in the city. And we'd have these big, it's a huge sanctuary, and we'd have these big gospel nights, like once or twice a year. St. Paul's Church, UCC was the name of the church.
Oh, nice.
And we had there's a phenomenal woman named Musette Morgan who would sing, and she could fill that space. And so to me, when music sounds like it fills a giant space, there's something that just feels and sounds right about that. Yeah. And I really feel like the songs on this album do that a lot. They just take up space, and they invite you in there. Like, it's not like they're pushing you out. It's like they surround you and they envelop you, and it's really great.
The thing I remember You Can Call Me Out being everywhere. I mean, everywhere. I mean, we had MTV, and I watched a ton of it, and it was always there. But the thing is, like, I don't remember anything else from this album being part of like the public sphere, I guess. Like, I don't remember any other songs being on the radio. I don't remember any other videos being created. Like, what was I listening to the wrong radio stations, or is that true? Was it just all You Can Call Me Al, and then people bought the album and thought the whole album was good?
I don't remember much of anything else. I remember Boy in the Bubble. I remember Boy in the Bubble, and which I think is great because, well, going back to another recurring theme here, it is the thesis statement for the album.
Yeah.
It is, and when it comes out and you've got that first sound coming in, and it's different, and it doesn't sound anything like what you expect from a folk poppy album, right? Yeah. It doesn't quite sound like that. It's weird. And then you've got these huge, ideas and this huge percussion. And I remember that. But I don't know if it was radio play or if it was because the album was everywhere. Yeah. You Can Call Me Al, I definitely remember like hoping we'd get caught at red lights if I hadn't heard that song on the drive home yet.
Yeah. I'll give you 20,000 points for Boy in the Bubble is the thesis statement, and I'll give you another 30,000 for hoping that you get caught at a red light. That's awesome. I think Graceland, the title track to me is a pretty signature thing. I've heard. Absolutely. I feel like that's included in the collection of songs from this album that I was familiar with before. Which is kind of a funny, I don't know, it does this funny thing, right? Where it kind of oscillates back and forth between lyrical content that feels like it could be on any other Paul Simon or Simon and Garfunkel album. And then stuff that feels very specifically about the conception of this piece. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that is part of what really makes this album work so well. So if Boy in the Bubble is a thesis statement and it's talking about innovation and creativity and progress and how it can be both good and bad. It can be the bomb in the baby carriage being wired to the radio, but it can also be, medicine is magical and magical is ordinary. It's we can do all of these things. And what that means is, and where I think the album really ends thematically with Myth of Fingerprints all around the world, is, I'm just going to call it Myth of Fingerprints. I like that one better. With Myth of Fingerprints is how we individually fit into that idea of creativity and innovation, and how both good and bad can exist at the same time in the same space. Now, what do we do with it? So you have the big idea in Boy in the Bubble, and then you have the very personal Paul Simon, quintessential kind of Paul Simon story song in Graceland.
Yeah.
And it's a search.
Yeah.
It's what he's looking for. He's like, and again, there's that juxtaposition of two things at the same time, that two opposite things at the same time. They don't know what they're looking for, but they know exactly where to find it. And that's what that song is. But it's also got this whole, the story is something that's everybody sees you're blown apart. Losing love is like a window in your heart. Everybody sees you're blown apart. Right. Yeah. And so it's this devastation, but the sound of it is very hopeful and promising and optimistic. And that dynamic goes throughout the album too. Like that plays throughout this whole thing. And so I love the fact that there's this unstated acknowledgement that in order to rebuild, you have to be destroyed. You have to come from destruction. You have to be blown apart. And if you want to find where you are now, if you want to rebuild yourself, you have to do that. And also knowing later that it was at least in part about Carrie Fisher, that adds to my childhood. Just adds to my childhood. That's all.
Yeah.
Having grown up on Star Wars, that's
right. Okay, before we just go completely down the rabbit hole, let's let the listeners sneak a peek at the album. Tell us, Derick, what have you chosen as your standout track?
My standout track is "Diamonds on the Soles of Her Shoes."
We haven't even talked about that one yet.
I know. It's my favorite song of all time, and it's been that way for forever. And yeah, we haven't talked about it.
Perfect. Okay. Say no more. We'll talk about it more on the other side. If you are on Spotify or YouTube, you're about to hear the whole dang song. If you're on Apple Podcasts, you'll just hear a little snippet. But either way, we'll see you on the other side.